God's people had a new land. They were beginning to build homes, plant crops, and live great lives in the promised land. There were many kinds of people living there. There were moms, dads, farmers, blacksmiths, shepherds, all kinds of people. There was a man named Samuel who lived there too. He was very important to God. See, Samuel was a prophet. He was God's servant. God told Samuel what the people should and shouldn't do. Then Samuel would tell the people what God said. The people had been living in the promised land for quite some time now, and they wanted to elect a king to lead their country.
But God is your king.
Samuel told them.
He is the one who looks after you best.
We want a real king,
they said.
One we can see.
God knew that a king might not be kind to his people or look after them as well as he would. But the people didn't care. They wanted a king, and they wanted one now. So God sent his prophet Samuel out to find a good king, someone who would lead God's people with the best of his ability. After much searching and seeking, Samuel narrowed down the search to one particular family. And inside this family, he found a young man named Saul. Saul was easy to spot because he was really, really tall. In fact, he was the tallest person in the entire country. He seemed like the perfect person to lead this new country as king. Saul was made king, and he led the country with his whole heart. He loved God's people. Saul became a great warrior, and he did a good job as king, until one day, there was a great army that came against Saul and the Israelites. It was a huge group of people called the Philistines. The Philistines had a big advantage over the Israelites. In fact, it was a 10-foot advantage. They had a huge man called Goliath on their side. He was a giant. When Saul and his army saw Goliath, they became very afraid. God told Saul to go and fight Goliath, and he would help him win. But Saul disobeyed, and he hid in his tent instead. So God had to find someone else to help him beat Goliath. He found the one and only person that would obey. It was a young boy named David. That day, the boy David beat Goliath, and all the Israelites celebrated. They cheered and praised David. And Saul was very sad, for he knew that he should have been the one that obeyed and defeated Goliath. More armies came and went as they tried to defeat the Israelites and take away the land that God had promised them. It wasn't long before the Philistines were back and they wanted revenge. This time the Philistines' army far outnumbered the Israelites. They began to scatter and hide from the Philistines. So Samuel, the prophet, sent word to King Saul telling him that he was coming to offer sacrifices to God, to ask God for his help in battle. Samuel specifically told the king to wait until he arrived before doing anything. Remember, Samuel was a prophet. He was God's servant, and it was his job to perform any sacrifices. Saul was in a difficult position. He remembered the last time he disobeyed God and how bad it was for him. But a huge army was attacking them, and Saul's army was running out of fear. Saul couldn't wait any longer. Instead of doing what he was told and waiting for Samuel to get there, Saul took matters into his own hands and performed the sacrifices himself. Saul disobeyed again, and wouldn't you know it, as soon as Saul was finished making the sacrifices to God, Samuel shows up. Saul tried to make excuses for disobeying God and his servant Samuel, but either way, he had still messed up big time. Samuel told Saul that he made a foolish mistake by not obeying God's command. Instead of admitting he was wrong and owning up to his mistakes, Saul continued to try and cover it up and continued to disobey. Saul disobeyed so much that God couldn't trust him anymore as king of his people. So God went and found a new king to take Saul's place. It was the one obedient person who defeated Goliath. God chose David to be the next king. Saul made a great king for a while, but when Saul started to disobey God, God couldn't trust him anymore. Saul's life began to get worse and worse and worse the more he disobeyed. But just the opposite happened to David. The more he obeyed, the more God trusted him. And David's life continued to get better until eventually he was king over the entire country.